So, because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth.
First of all, Danielle, thank you for sitting down with me.
Yeah, of course.
You really are one of the most interesting conversations that I have on a regular basis. First thing I'm interested in with you is every time I'm around you, I get these insights into, I have like these generational questions. We're both psychoanalytical,
Absolutely.
and we both observe the detail, and we treat our generation and the time we're living in like archaeologists, like we're finding little bones. But you're really an interesting mix between a person that's very deeply aware of your generation, and yet you're outside of it.
Removed.
You're outside of it. You don't obey its whims. You don't often march to the Pied Pipers of your time. You're more comfortable than the average person I know with being outside the zeitgeist. So you're a millennial full blown.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, do you agree that your generation has everything from platonic friendships, romantic relationships? Do you think that that's been uniquely challenging for that generation? And then, interesting as two Christians, the Christians don't seem to be in any way immune.
Mm-hmm.
Us Christians like to think that
we
should, everything from like social anxiety to commitment problems among men to the like total disinterest in getting married. Do you first of all agree with this Gen Xer that that's real?
Yes. Yeah.
What is your general take on why it's real?
First of all, I think that every generation has some sort of emotional stunting. The boomer stories where you have a lot of narcissism kind of built into being the patriarch or matriarch of the family, helping out on the farm, but it looks a lot like child labor.
Oh, wow.
That kind
That's
of stuff,
a very good
right?
point. Yeah. And so they're carrying the wounds of that.
And I think for the most part, parents are just doing the best they can with what they have, what they've been given. But just because you're doing the best you can doesn't mean you're giving your child everything they need. You can't.
So that's interesting. So depending on what that nutritional, if you look at the human, like a food group, whatever that food group was that was deprived, that's manifesting itself in another deprivation in the next generation. And
I think so.
Yeah, I think that's actually really, really true. The boomers and the 60 kids, they were narcissists, they were revolutionaries, they were very ungrateful by my standards. The most annoying thing about a Gen Xer is there's no real, on paper, there's no real reason to be so depressed. And so, your parents are kind of still together, no wars, everybody's got a job, and you're running around singing Nirvana songs. Like, that math doesn't add up.
Right,
you know what I mean? It's like fake depression.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know what I mean? So, like that Seattle scene, if you actually study the culture, there's no real reason for it. So it's like, what are you guys so bummed about? Why are you wearing like flannel all the time? It's all this stuff. There's always like breaks in generations. I don't think it was the source material, Danielle. You know what I mean? I don't think it was like, oh, suddenly people aren't interested in like romantic relationships that move into marriage.
No,
there seems to be something different.
Going back to the generation and each having an emotional deficit, I think it's because you have like a cultural mold that most people are a part of, right?
Sure.
And as we go down the line generationally, these newer generations are experiencing falling out of our culture. And just like we have deficits emotionally on all sides, we have deficits culturally on all sides.
The reason that the shared source material isn't the same is that it really isn't the same.
It literally isn't.
Yeah, we don't respect the same forms of governance. Something like borders, language, culture, not assumed in your average citizen, where maybe my grandfather could have really assumed that.
Yeah.
Maybe as much as 90% of the people that he was running into, he had this source material. Same thing with like a Judeo-Christian ethic. But now we're getting into that stuff washed out in my generation. Like people are being,
what you were saying about Gen Xers, like not knowing who to be mad at or like any of that. I think that was like maybe just a missed opportunity from either political side that they just like missed you guys.
Yeah. I really think that's true. We were like low-hanging fruit.
Latchkey kids.
Right. That was, okay, so that might have been what it was. It was like an abundance of materialism. So like all my friends' parents, they had like a job and all that stuff. But they didn't have a lot of presence. 80-hour work week.
Right.
Latchkey kids is like straight out of the...
Yeah, but the cultural mold holds it together. You can still belong. You can figure things out, figure out how to fill that space.
Yeah,
How to
because
get
you
your
could still
needs
see
met.
like your neighbor's dad doing the like motion, so
Right.
you can glean it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but again,
You
back
could
to
even watch it on TV,
you
and
could
all
watch
the
it on TV,
families on TV were
still propping that up,
right. They
right?
were
To some
together. They were
extent,
supportive. They were a unit, even if it didn't look like a traditional unit.
yeah,
It was a
yeah.
unit.
There was community
Yeah.
there. It wasn't just scorched earth destruction of
Right.
everything.
Nothing is true
Yeah.
anymore.
So now we live in like more like a French Revolutionary
Mhm.
kind of attitude. Everything must burn, and as a result, there is no glue.
Mhm.
And that's manifesting itself all the way down into our micro
Mhm.
relationships. And I think there's a lot of truth into that. People spend a lot of time diagnosing all the socioeconomic problems and the racial problems, the justice problems, but those same formulas of just destroying all the pillars, the trust in
Yes.
institutions, they're
Yes.
manifesting in our
No,
micro
we
lives
have a
too.
lot of problems in our systems. Like if our political machine were a forest, right? We're seeing a lot of rotten, like diseased trees, right? But not all of the trees are that way. And it might be easier to burn down the forest, but it might be better to understand why those trees were planted in the first place
Yes.
before we burn them all down.
Yes, yes. That's a very good analogy. And a lot of the new right is fascinating in that it's this hodgepodge of people that basically agree with what you just said.
Yeah. I'd
Interesting
have
way
to argue too that the new right is more like everyone right and center, like that used to be considered
So
center.
that's what's real interesting. I love how you said that nuanced version of yes, there's self-correction, there's analyzing, there's possibly things we need to do differently. We still think Smokey the Bear says don't just burn the whole place down.
Right.
Like this is a very useful analogy
And
to differentiate.
we should be able to agree on that, but we literally can't even agree on that anymore.
Right, right. And in last to rub, that's that. So the micro problems and the macro problems have so much in common in
Mhm.
this way that in order to solve anything or have relationships with anybody, you need common assumed ideology, principles. They don't. It does not have to be homogenous,
Mhm.
and it doesn't have to be lockstep. That's the beauty of America. Out
Yeah.
of many, one, all that stuff. But you can't have nothing.
Right. Yeah.
You
And
can't have nothing.
like you brought up the Timcast crew. I have so much respect for
Yeah,
them.
me too.
And I agree on a lot of things from each of them individually, some not, but one thing that I absolutely love is the mutual respect and being able to speak in good faith.
Yeah,
If you can agree to speak in good faith, to argue in good faith for what you believe in, what you think is the best way to do things or the right way to do
right.
things, and you can give the person you're talking to that benefit of the doubt,
Mm,
to assume that they're also doing the best they can with the resources that they have, just like you are. If
yes.
you can start there, that's a good foundation.
Why do you think we lost that? Like, what's just your general assessment of that?
It's eroded because we haven't built anything against it. So if you're not willing to put the floodgates down, if you're not willing to build up those sandbags, if you're not out there before the storm comes, once the storm is here, you're overwhelmed, right? So I think this is something that we culturally, especially like Christians, a lot of the things that really stand as tent poles for our faith and our faith culture, right?
Mm.
We've lost those, and it's because they haven't been protected.
Why? Is it because they haven't been truly fortified in us as individuals? Like we never really took them in. When I grew up, the average kid would have really been familiar with the ornamentation of their faith.
Hmm.
I love how you're talking about the sandbags and the foundations and the stuff that fends off the hurricanes. This is just like rear view thinking now, but that was not strong.
Hmm.
Do you think that that's the chickens have come home to roost on that?
Question for you too.
Yeah.
The friends that you had growing up that maybe didn't attend church or didn't consider themselves religious, would you be comfortable saying that they probably knew who Jesus was?
Yeah. I call it, yeah, that's a great question. I have thought about this before. I call it the vacation Bible school default setting.
Hmm.
That's like how I like to look at it, like middle school class.
Hmm.
There would have been almost nobody, with the exception, I had a couple friends who were foreign exchange students.
Hmm.
There would have been nobody who didn't have the vacation Bible school
Hmm.
default settings. Just in the ecosystem almost of who they were,
And I think
their grandmother, their aunt,
yeah, and I
somebody.
think our country really enjoyed that default familiarity for a long time.
Yeah.
Um, it's from my understanding, it seemed like just about everyone went to church, whether they wanted to or not. It's just
Whether it
what
was
you do,
genuine, yeah,
right?
right, very cultural.
Yeah, and so now we're seeing like church numbers are declining and stuff. But honestly, what I see is people who actually intend to be at church
Right.
for the
Right.
reasons you should be at church
Right.
are remaining
Right.
and are adding to the number, whereas the people who didn't really want to be here are making that choice for themselves.
Yeah.
So I think some of this degradation that we're seeing is actually what Christians in other countries are dealing with, that our cultures are separate and that our cultures do not align and that our cultures can't coexist peacefully.
What does a future look like with that's a pretty sober analysis. And I've thought this for some time, and it's not even that uncommon now in like popular talking to talk of civil war. And then there's a version of that happening in his church too. And I'm fascinated by this. From what I can tell, there are two groups of ideological people that are vying for the name Christianity. There's an ideological, at the very least, civil war right in the middle of the evangelical American church.
Mhm.
So I think if we really deep dive this, we'd get down to the same source material on all fronts, is that we're not sharing the same common ground. We're not sharing the same assumptions of truth. It's happening with our citizens and it's happening with our brothers and sisters in Christ. There's this just gaping, everybody is sort of aware of it. And I don't know that I have ever seen anybody really know, genuinely know how to fix it. Most of the time, what you hear is Christians say, return to the bedrock, return to the Word of God. But that itself is attempting to be redefined. And,
Absolutely. I've seen a lot of interesting interpretations on TikTok.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Right. See, this is something interesting too, is that you grew up, unlike myself, in a firm postmodern time.
Well, it's anxiety inducing.
Yeah.
And depressing. And I think that makes sense with all the diagnoses we see lately.
Mm-hmm.
It's understandable.
I agree. I think there's probably no way to quantify how much that's affecting the human psyche.
I mean, I have the peace that passes understanding, right? And I'm struggling every day with that. I see the world around me and I think, wow, this is a beautiful place, but there are a lot of unfortunate, necessary difficulties that we just have to
deal
get
with
through.
that. Like I share that with you.
Yeah.
So why did we not exemplify the fruits of the Spirit and the things that we say separate us? What's your take?
I think it comes down to, again, like the culture war that we're experiencing between the church and the outside world is not just between the church and the outside world, it's within the church because we're all affected by the world we're living in, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we've had this time of complacency where sure we have leaders, wisdom-filled leaders, but in low supply, I think. And maybe it's always been that way. Has it always been that way?
I don't know. I mean, there's always been like big noticeable falls. Like that's always caught people's attention, like the ones that fumble the football real bad.
Serves the dark side, so to speak,
Yeah,
to
it
definitely
does.
put prominence
Right.
on those bigger
Right.
hazards.
It's an interesting discipline in life to not let yourself in any way, I can't say I succeed at this very much, but that squeaky wheel gets the oil thing and that like your friend, like if you think of your childhood friends, the one that was complaining and mooning and groaning all the time, they did bogart the room and they did suck a lot of the oxygen out of the room. And your friend that was like quick to smile and always full, they kind of did play second fiddle to the drama, and that transcends all the way up to your adulthood.
Yeah.
The ones that are in the trenches, loyal and solid, and they tend not to be the ones that get the covers of the magazines. And and if you did something stupid, if you represented, especially if you represented the right but wrong constituency, you were gonna get a lot of ink and you were gonna get a lot of film time. And Christians don't, again, like, why do we not have wisdom to see? That would be considered, well, it would be considered, the biblical term for that would be wisdom, prudence, the ability not to get sucked into the current of our time. And just, I have a lot of theories as to why there's this deep biological difference between me and some of my brothers and sisters in Christ. But the biggest one I can notice in all of my friends who ideologically feel this way, like a level of uncomfortable with being outside of step with the culture that is just so powerful that it seems to have a magnetism that sucks everything else in. That's my working theory, that there's a lot of reasons. Some of them are intellectually honest. Some of them are justified. There's a lot of critiques. There's a lot of things that I actually enjoy talking to my more progressive Christians about. But if there's a stance that needs to be had, and it's going to render them deeply outside of the social norms, there's about a 75% chance that I can count on that Christian abandoning what I think is a pretty obvious
Yeah.
Christian value, and I find that I just lose respect for it. Like this is just me being honest. This just strikes me as so cowardly in ways that I just do not see represented in our faith.
Yeah.
And of all the differences, that's the biggest one because I can't reconcile that.
Yeah. And I have friends who are progressive Christians, and the one thing I hold on to is that we're worshiping the same God. And
I'd like to know how you
whatever,
navigate
yeah,
that.
whatever issues I have or whatever blind spots I have, I hope that they understand that I have a relationship with God and give me the benefit of the doubt like I do for them.
Mm,
I do think, however, that for a Christian, there's
that's
always going to
very smart.
thanks, I try.
No, that's very wise.
There's always going to be this temptation as a Christian to separate from the faith and to join the culture. Whatever land you're living in, whatever culture that is, there's always going to be that pull, right? And what a clever lie to tell a Christian that they're actually doing good by joining the culture.
Yeah, what a
What a
lie.
clever lie.
Yes, very insightful. Very insightful, Daniel. I like that one part you threw in there that you're doing good. Because I think in some ways, when you step outside of the culture and the culture is posturing itself uniquely as our time does, where they posture everything as like kindness and love and acceptance and stuff. When that lexicon is pervasive,
Mhm.
then to disagree in any way with kindness, love, and acceptance is going to seem at first glance mean not Christ-like,
Mhm.
not loving.
Yeah.
But like all things, there's depth and there's
Yeah.
many dimensions through which you can see a thing. Love is the most interesting one I find. Like this is another generational breakdown I've discovered, and maybe it even isn't a generational breakdown, but I've never seen the term used in such a hollow way
Mm.
in all of my life than in the last 10 years. But love is such a deep, rich, well-rounded term to just call affirmation love. My heart actually breaks for that person because that's such a hollow version of what love is. It's a lot of wonderful things that you're leaving off the table if all it is thumbs up 24 hours a day.
Right.
Right?
And
You're really
I
selling
think
yourself short.
I think something that's benefited me as far as kind of being cloistered outside of worldly culture for most of my childhood, I didn't get that expectation growing up as far as like making sure that your words don't hurt kind of stuff. Like I was, my
Oh, that's
culture
fascinating.
was a little bit further behind because we were outside of things. So just like our clothes are coming from Goodwill from 10 years ago that they were the common
Oh,
style,
so your
so is the culture.
ideological like
Yes.
frameworking.
Yes. So nowadays it seems like love can only be love if it's accepted as being immediately helpful or comforting. And I don't see that that's the case. And now definitely being like a depressed existential puddle for a while in my teens,
Okay.
it helps me really celebrate the sanctification and suffering. I really hold on to that because I'm not familiar with the mountaintop
Interesting.
highs as a spiritual experience. I was actually really concerned, if I'm not crying Thursday night at church camp, am I even a Christian, right?
Oh, wow.
Um, I'm past that now. I get it now. But I definitely do cling toward the negatives more than the positives because they're real to me.
I find myself out of step with a lot of Christians because I came to faith through the fear of God.
Mm.
And it's similar, it's not the same as what you just described, but in the sense,
Fearfully and wonderfully
yeah.
made.
Well, I had this like moment, partly because of the way I was mentored, but I had this moment that God was a sovereign God to be taken seriously and that I owed him
Mhm.
my loyalty. And it
Yes.
was very different than being emotionally coasted into faith, which I've discovered that lots of people have a very emotional front end to their relationship with Jesus.
Mhm.
And I don't belittle that. I don't.
Mhm.
That whole like C.S. Lewis, Aslan character is so interesting in his well-roundedness that
Yeah.
he's not safe, but he's good.
Mhm.
And I like that like creative depiction,
Mhm.
understanding that this is a complex God. But my on-ramp to faith was fear. Not fear like somebody's going to beat me with a stick. Fear like reverence, which is a different thing.
That was absolutely the introduction I had when I really started owning my faith. Because as a child, it's like Jesus is love. He loves you. All the songs really centered around that.
Right.
And honestly, even my understanding of love, I recently saw a TikTok of someone describing their understanding of love, and I related really deeply to this. They said that they tried to analyze it, and they knew it was somewhere between how they felt about their dog and how they could tell their mother felt about them.
That's good.
And
I like that.
That took me a second because
there's philosophy in that.
Yes.
I like that. I
Yeah.
also like how you redeemed just in that quick. You redeemed social media just like that, because not all things are bad. You got to glean a thing. The way I feel about my dog, and what did you say?
And how your mother feels about
your
you.
mother feels about you.
Seems to feel about you.
Yeah, that's
But I think
an important distinction.
I think a big problem with the internet is that people are entering the internet before they have the mental fortitude or emotional fortitude for it. And I think we're already weakened mentally and emotionally to start. And then while we're in that developmental phase, to be entering this pool of non-truth, very difficult to sort when you don't even know what the truth is.
So before your antibodies are strong. Very thoughtful. I think that's true, because the only thing I have to offer there is when I imagine giving my son cell phones, I have a lot of anxiety about that. But not for all the reasons that you often hear. It's just the fact that I imagine myself at 14. You know, here's Brock Lawley in my mind. Clearly, I can see him. Not a good picture. And then I imagine you handing him an iPhone with an internet browser. The levels of hot dumpster fire that I see ensuing cannot be overstated.
And it's not just allowing your child access to the world. You're allowing the entire world access to your child.
Yes, it's a
That's
portal.
the scary thing.
It's a portal. And yet, it's one of these classic conundrums. Like, when is the right time? How do you build up, you know, like I read this, a wonderful, fascinating, albeit dark commentary on how Rome used to prepare like children for like war and all these things. And it was like this strategic strengthening of mental familiarity with like death and pain and all these different things. And then as dark as this commentary was, I saw a correlation somehow in preparing like a child for this, like just cynicism alone, right? Cynicism can gobble you up. It can chew you alive. You can't just throw cynicism at a kid real young, because you want to keep that light in their eyes. There's no recipe that you can download off the internet for that.
Right.
Because the person's disposition is going to play a part, their intellectual makeup.
Your temperament, their temperament, yeah.
There's too many X factors.
Yeah.
And the iPhone sits in that same place of ambiguity, or whatever the new Elon Musk phone is going to be. I take my kids to these playgrounds, and I largely let my son flirt with a lot of danger at these playgrounds. And my fellow peers that are raising children are very angry with me for it. Like, it's visible. They can't hold back their nonverbals. It's a very awkward interaction. But I cling to the fact that I think I'm more right than I am wrong. And so I just sit in the awkwardness of it, right? Where the scathing looks. And this is not a joke. That's an analogy for what I feel like a lot in my life, which is I have this sense that the popular is very wrong right now. And I don't arbitrarily think that. I look at the fruit of the tree that these ideas are yielding, and I see rot.
No, when you talk about like that purposeful hardening of like the Spartan boys, right? I think that there's still purpose right now, but I think it's a purposeful softening. And I think it's the point now where social exclusion, just those little dirty looks for the average person,
is
you're
enough.
going to fall in line.
You're going to fall in line.
You're going to fall in line.
Can show we love